It was supposed to be a normal Sunday, the kind of day that blends into the background of life. I had no reason to suspect that a single knock at the door would upend everything I thought I knew. The sound echoed through the house, interrupting the faint hum of the TV. I wasn't expecting anyone, and Danielle, my wife of 15 years, was upstairs folding laundry. I opened the door to find a man standing on my porch. He looked nervous, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jacket, his eyes darting around like he was second-guessing his decision to be there. I didn't recognize him, but there was something about the way he held himself that put me on edge. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral but wary. "Are you Ethan?" he asked, his voice shaky. I nodded. "Yeah. Who's asking?" He hesitated, taking a deep breath before speaking. "My name's Ryan. I'm sorry to do this, but I need to talk to you about your wife." Danielle's name hanging in the air like a bomb about to go off sent a jolt through me. "What about her?" I asked, my voice harder now. He glanced over his shoulder, as if he was worried someone might be watching. "Can I come in? This isn't a conversation we should have out here." I should have shut the door in his face. Told him to leave and not come back. But there was something in his expression, a mix of guilt and desperation, that stopped me. I stepped aside, letting him in. "Say what you need to say," I said, crossing my arms as I leaned against the wall. Ryan ran a hand through his hair, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else but here. "I don't even know where to start," he muttered. "This isn't something I ever thought I'd have to do." "Get to the point," I snapped. "What does this have to do with Danielle?" He looked up at me then, his face pale, his jaw tight. "She and we've been seeing each other for the past 11 days. The room spun for a second, the air sucked out of my lungs. "What?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know she was married at first," he continued quickly, like he was trying to explain himself. "She didn't tell me. I only found out yesterday when I saw a photo of you and her on her phone. I confronted her about it, and she admitted everything." The words felt like knives, each one slicing deeper. I stared at him, struggling to process what he was saying. "You're telling me my wife has been cheating on me with you?" He nodded, shame written all over his face. "I didn't know, man. I swear. If I'd known." "Stop," I said, cutting him off. "I don't care about your excuses. I care about the truth. How did this start?" He shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the floor. "We met at a bar. She said she was out with friends, but they'd left early. We started talking, and one thing led to another. I didn't think to ask if she was married. She didn't have a ring on. She never wears it when she goes out," I said bitterly, the realization hitting me like a punch to the gut. "I'm sorry," Ryan said again, his voice hollow. "I know that doesn't mean much, but I didn't want to keep this from you. You deserve to know." I stared at him for a long moment, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to throw him out, to hit him, to make him pay for what he'd done. But the rational part of me knew this wasn't just on him. This was on her. "Get out," I said finally, my voice cold. "I don't want to see you again." Ryan nodded and left without another word. As the door closed behind him, I stood there in silence, the weight of his confession crashing down on me. I wasn't sure how long I stood there, staring at nothing, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Finally, I turned and went upstairs. Danielle was in the bedroom, folding a pile of towels, humming to herself like nothing was wrong. For a brief moment, I considered not saying anything, ignoring what I'd just learned and pretending everything was fine. But I couldn't. Not after what Ryan had just told me. "Who's Ryan?" I asked, my voice cutting through the air like a blade. Danielle froze, her hands gripping the towel she was holding. Slowly, she turned to face me, her eyes wide with shock and guilt. The truth was out. There was no going back now. Danielle stared at me like a deer caught in headlights, the towel clutched in her hands as if it could shield her from the storm that was about to break. The silence in the room was deafening, and I could see her mind racing, trying to decide whether to lie or come clean. "I asked you a question," I said, my voice low but firm. "Who is Ryan?" Her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came out. She glanced down, then back up at me, tears already pooling in her eyes. "Ethan, I don't know what to say," she finally managed. "How about the truth?" I shot back. "Start with how long you've been lying to me." She let out a shaky breath and dropped the towel onto the bed. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she said, her voice trembling. "It wasn't supposed to be like this." "Cut the crap," I snapped. "Ryan came to me today. He told me everything. He said it's been 11 days. Is that true?" Her eyes widened, and for a split second, I saw anger flash across her face, anger that he had told me, not that she'd done it. "Yes," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's true." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Even though I'd heard it from Ryan, hearing it from her made it real in a way I wasn't prepared for. "So, what?" I demanded. "You meet some guy at a bar and decide to throw away 15 years of marriage for 11 days of sneaking around?" "It wasn't like that," she said quickly, stepping toward me. "It wasn't planned, Ethan. I wasn't looking for this." "But you found it," I interrupted. "You found it, and instead of stopping, you let it happen. Over and over again. How could you do this to me? To us? To Adam?" Her face crumpled at the mention of our son. "Please don't bring him into this," she said, her voice breaking. "He's already in it," I said, my anger surging. "Whether you like it or not, you've dragged him into this. Do you even understand what you've done? You've destroyed our family, Danielle. For what? For some guy you barely know?" She broke down then, tears streaming down her face as she sank onto the edge of the bed. "I didn't want this," she sobbed. "I didn't want to hurt you." "Then why did you do it?" I asked, my voice rising. "Why, Danielle? Was I not enough for you? Was our life together not good enough?" She shook her head, wiping at her tears. "It wasn't about you," she said. "It was. I don't know. I felt lost. I felt like I wasn't myself anymore." "So your solution was to have an affair?" I said, incredulous. "To betray the one person who's always been there for you? The one person who trusted you completely?" "I wasn't thinking," she said, her voice desperate. "I made a mistake. A horrible mistake. But it didn't mean anything, Ethan. It didn't mean anything." "It didn't mean anything?" I repeated, laughing bitterly. "You slept with him. You lied to me. You risked everything we've built together, and you have the audacity to say it didn't mean anything?" She looked up at me then, her eyes pleading. "I love you," she said. "I never stopped loving you." It was a moment of weakness. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging you to give me a chance to make this right." I stared at her, my chest heaving, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to believe her, to cling to the hope that we could somehow fix this. But another part of me, the part that had been shattered by her betrayal, knew that nothing would ever be the same. "You don't get to beg," I said finally, my voice cold. "You don't get to ask for forgiveness. Not after what you've done." She flinched as if I'd slapped her, her tears falling faster now. "Ethan, please," she whispered. "I'll do anything. Just tell me what to do." I couldn't stand to look at her anymore. The sight of her, of the woman I thought I knew, made me sick. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, slamming the door behind me. I went downstairs and grabbed a beer from the fridge, my hands trembling as I twisted off the cap. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the wall, my mind a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. For the rest of the night, I avoided her. She didn't come downstairs, and I didn't go back up. I slept on the couch, though slept was a generous term for the fitful few hours I spent tossing and turning, my mind replaying every detail of what I'd just learned. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Adam's voice. He was asking Danielle what was wrong, why her eyes were red. She gave him some excuse about allergies, but I could tell he didn't believe her. As I sat there listening, a realization hit me: I couldn't let this destroy Adam's world, not like it had destroyed mine. He didn't deserve that. He deserved stability, security, and love. And I was going to give it to him, even if it killed me. But Danielle? She was going to pay for what she'd done. She might think she could cry her way out of this, but she was about to learn just how wrong she was. The morning after her confession, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Danielle hovered in the background, pretending to busy herself with dishes, but I knew she was waiting for me to say something. She looked as tired as I felt, her face pale and her eyes puffy from crying all night. Adam had gone to a friend's house for the day, leaving the two of us alone. I had avoided her since our exchange the night before, but today, there was no avoiding it. I needed answers, and she was going to give them to me. "Sit down," I said, my voice steady but cold. Danielle hesitated, glancing at me warily before obeying. She sat across from me, folding her hands on the table like a child called to the principal's office. "You're going to tell me everything," I said, leaning forward. "No lies, no excuses. I want to know exactly how this started and why you thought you could get away with it." She swallowed hard, her fingers twisting together. "I already told you." "You told me nothing," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "All you've done is cry and make excuses. Start from the beginning. How did you meet him?" She nodded slowly, taking a deep breath before speaking. "It was at a bar." "I told you that. I went out with some of the women from the non-profit after an event. They left early, but I wasn't ready to go home yet. I ran into Ryan at the bar. He started talking to me, and I don't know. He was charming. He made me laugh." "And you didn't think to mention that you were married?" I asked, my tone dripping with sarcasm. "I didn't plan for anything to happen," she said quickly. "It was just a conversation at first." "At first," I repeated. "But then what? How did it go from a conversation to you sneaking around behind my back?" She hesitated, her eyes darting to the side as if she were looking for an escape. "We exchanged numbers," she admitted. "He said he wanted to keep in touch. I didn't think it would lead to anything, but then he started texting me. He'd ask about my day, tell me jokes, make me feel noticed." "Noticed," I said, my hands gripping the edge of the table. "And I didn't make you feel noticed?" "It's not that," she said quickly, her voice pleading. "Ethan, you've been so busy with work, with everything. I didn't feel like you saw me anymore. So this is my fault now?" I asked, my voice rising. "No, that's not what I'm saying," she said, shaking her head. "I made a mistake, okay? A horrible mistake. I wasn't thinking about the consequences. I felt lost." "Lost," I repeated bitterly. "And you decided the best way to find yourself was to cheat on me." She flinched at my words but didn't argue. Instead, she wiped at her eyes, her tears threatening to spill over again. "How many times?" I asked, my voice hard. "What? How many times did you sleep with him?" She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the table. "Twice," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Twice," I said, shaking my head. "And where did this happen? His place? A hotel? Our house?" "Never here," she said quickly. "I would never bring him here." "As if that makes it any better," I snapped. "So, where?" "A hotel," she admitted, her voice breaking. "It was a mistake, Ethan." "I know it was. I wish I could take it back." "But you can't," I said, leaning forward. "You can't undo what you did, Danielle. You can't unbreak this family." "I know," she said, her tears falling freely now. "I'm so sorry, Ethan. I'll do anything to fix this. I'll go to therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. Just please don't give up on us." "Us?" I said, laughing bitterly. There is no us anymore, Danielle. You killed that the moment you decided to sleep with him. She started to protest, but I cut her off. You know what the worst part of this is? I asked, my voice trembling with anger. It's not just that you betrayed me. It's that you lied to my face every single day, acting like nothing was wrong. How do you live with yourself? She didn't answer, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed. I stared at her, the woman I had once loved more than anything, and felt nothing but disgust. I don't even know who you are anymore, I said finally, my voice cold. And honestly, I don't think I want to. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. Ethan, please, she whispered. Don't say that. We can fix this. I know we can. I stood up, pushing my chair back with a screech. You can stay here for now, I said, my tone clipped. But don't expect me to act like everything's fine. As far as I'm concerned, this marriage is over. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, but I didn't stick around to hear her response. I grabbed my keys and left the house, slamming the door behind me. I drove aimlessly for hours, my mind a whirlwind of anger and heartbreak. Every time I thought about her with him, it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I wanted to scream, to break something, to make her feel the pain she'd caused me. But no matter how much I wanted to hurt her, I knew I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I figured out exactly what I was going to do next. When Danielle walked out of the kitchen that morning, I knew one thing, I wasn't going to let her coast through this without consequences. She thought tears and apologies would make me roll over, that I'd quietly let her off the hook while she rebuilt her life at my expense. She had no idea who she was dealing with. For the next 2 days, I stayed civil, giving her the illusion that things were simmering down. I still barely spoke to her, but I didn't lash out either. I acted like I was exhausted from it all, as if I was retreating to lick my wounds. Danielle tiptoed around me, likely trying to gauge if I'd cooled off enough to manipulate the situation back in her favor. What she didn't know was that I had other plans. The first step was exposing her lies to Adam in a controlled, age-appropriate way. I refused to let her poison his mind with excuses or attempts to rewrite the narrative. I sat him down one evening after school while Danielle was still at work. Adam, there's something we need to talk about, I began. He looked up from his tablet, sensing the seriousness in my tone. What is it, Dad? Your mom and I are going through a rough time, I said carefully. And I need you to know it's not your fault. None of this is your fault. But the truth is, your mom did something that hurt me and hurt our family. Adam frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. What did she do? She broke my trust, I said simply. She made choices that weren't fair to me or to you. And because of that, we're not going to live together anymore. He stared at me for a moment, his young mind working to process the information. Are you getting divorced? He asked quietly. Yes, I said, my voice steady. But that doesn't change how much I love you. You're the most important thing to me, Adam, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you're okay. He nodded slowly, his eyes welling up. I don't want things to change, he whispered. I know, I said, pulling him into a hug. But sometimes change is the only option. And we're going to get through it. Together. With Adam on my side, I moved on to the next phase of my plan, ensuring Danielle faced real-world consequences. She thought this mess would stay confined to our household, but I had no intention of letting her walk away unscathed. Danielle had always been proud of her job at the nonprofit. It wasn't just work for her, it was her identity. She loved the admiration she got from her colleagues and the community, the way people saw her as a dedicated wife and mother who also gave back to others. That image was about to crumble. The nonprofit had a strict policy about workplace conduct, especially anything that could tarnish its reputation. I knew Danielle and Ryan had attended several public events together through her job, and I also knew their relationship had spilled over into those spaces. I gathered the evidence I had, the texts, the timeline of their meetings, and photos from Ryan's wife, who had confirmed that one of their meetups coincided with a gala hosted by the organization. I sent it all to Danielle's boss in an anonymous email. I kept the tone professional and factual, emphasizing that I was concerned about the integrity of the organization and its image in the community. I didn't embellish or gloat. I let the facts speak for themselves. 2 days later, Danielle came home from work earlier than usual, her face pale and her hands trembling. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, not bothering to look up from the laptop I was working on. "Don't play games with me, Ethan," she snapped. "They called me into a meeting today. They know about Ryan. They know about everything." "Maybe you should have thought about that before you started sneaking around with him," I said coolly. She stared at me, her face a mixture of anger and despair. "I could lose my job," she said. "That's not my problem," I said, standing up and walking past her. "Actions have consequences, Danielle. Welcome to reality." As expected, word spread quickly after the nonprofit let her go. The community wasn't as forgiving as she might have hoped. People she once considered friends stopped reaching out, and the support system she'd relied on began to crumble. But the final blow came when Ryan's wife filed for divorce. She sent Danielle a letter through her lawyer, demanding that she stay away from Ryan or risk legal action. Danielle broke down when she got the letter, sobbing in the middle of the living room. "I've lost everything," she cried, looking at me as if I was supposed to comfort her. "No," I said, my voice cold. "You threw everything away. There's a difference." By the time she finally packed her bags and left, she was a shell of the person she'd been. The woman who had once radiated confidence and control was gone, replaced by someone who was forced to face the destruction she'd caused. As for me, I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. The pain of her betrayal was still there, but I took comfort in knowing I had done everything I could to protect Adam and hold her accountable. This wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about rebuilding my life on my terms. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was on the right path. Danielle's departure left the house quieter than ever. Adam was with me full-time, and while he tried to adjust to the changes, I could see the cracks. He was quieter, spending more time alone in his room or with his headphones on, avoiding conversations about his mom. I didn't push him. I knew he'd open up when he was ready. Danielle, however, was harder to avoid. Even after moving out, she kept reaching out, texts, calls, emails. Most of the time, I ignored her. There was nothing left to say, nothing that would change what had happened. But one afternoon, after weeks of dodging her attempts to talk, I finally gave in. She showed up at the house at my invitation, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, looking more subdued than I'd ever seen her. She wasn't wearing makeup, and her usual polished appearance had given way to something raw and unguarded. She stood in the doorway, clutching her purse like it was a shield. "Thank you for letting me come over," she said quietly. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. She walked into the living room, her movements hesitant. I pointed to the couch, and she sat down slowly, setting her purse beside her. I sat in the chair opposite her, keeping the coffee table between us. "What do you want, Danielle?" I asked, my tone devoid of warmth. She flinched at the coldness in my voice but took a deep breath. "I wanted to talk about Adam," she said. "And about us." "There is no us," I said bluntly. "You made sure of that." She looked down at her hands, nodding. I know I ruined everything. I've had a lot of time to think about what I did, and I know there's no excuse for it. But I need to know where we stand." "You want to know where we stand?" I asked, leaning forward. "We're divorced, Danielle. That's where we stand. You're Adam's mother, and I'll never stop you from seeing him, but as far as I'm concerned, you and I are done." "Completely." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back, trying to hold herself together. "I don't want to lose him," she said. "I know I've already lost you, but I can't lose my son too. Please, Ethan. Tell me what I need to do to make this right with him." I studied her for a moment, trying to gauge her sincerity. "You don't get to make this right, Danielle," I said. "That's not how this works. What you did hurt him, just like it hurt me. You can't undo that." "I just want a chance to be his mom again," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I messed up, but I love him. I love him so much. Then show it, I said. Be consistent. Be honest. Don't make promises you can't keep. That's the only way you'll earn his trust back. She nodded, her tears finally spilling over. I will, she whispered. I'll do whatever it takes. Good, I said. Because if you let him down again, there won't be a second chance. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything unspoken hanging in the air. Finally, she looked up at me, her expression pained. Do you think you'll ever forgive me? She asked softly. I leaned back in my chair, considering her question. Forgiveness isn't something you get to ask for, I said. It's something you earn. And right now, I'm not sure if I can ever get there. Maybe one day. Maybe not. But that's not what matters right now. What matters is Adam. She nodded again, wiping her eyes. I understand, she said. Good, I said, standing up. Because this isn't about you or me anymore. It's about making sure he's okay. That's all that matters now. Danielle stood as well, picking up her purse. She hesitated, as if she wanted to say something else, but then she nodded and headed for the door. Thank you for letting me come, she said as she opened it. I didn't respond, just watched as she stepped outside and closed the door behind her. When she was gone, I sat back down, staring at the spot where she'd been. I didn't feel anger anymore, or even sadness. What I felt was something closer to acceptance. Danielle had made her choices, and I'd made mine. There was no undoing the damage, no going back to the life we'd had before. But in that moment, I realized that I didn't need to go back. I had Adam, and I had my integrity. That was enough. It had to be. I walked into the courtroom with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in months. The divorce proceedings were simple, uncontested, straightforward, but it wasn't the legalities that made the moment significant. It was the finality of it. The symbolic closing of a chapter one never thought I'd have to end. Danielle sat at the other table, her lawyer beside her, shuffling papers. She looked drained, a shadow of the woman I once knew. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if she felt any of the same relief I did, or if her mind was consumed with regret. Not that it mattered anymore. The judge asked the routine questions, and I answered them with the same detachment I'd learned to adopt throughout this ordeal. Danielle did the same. Her voice didn't tremble, nor did she argue when the custody agreement was read aloud. We both knew the fight had ended long before we set foot in that courtroom. When it was over, the judge nodded, stamped the documents, and looked at us with a hint of sympathy. The court grants the dissolution of marriage, he said, his tone even. I nodded, thanked the judge, and stood up. I didn't look at Danielle as I left the courtroom. Outside, the crisp air hit me like a wake-up call. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past few months lift ever so slightly. Danielle emerged a few minutes later, hesitating at the top of the courthouse steps before approaching me. Ethan, she said softly. I turned to face her, my expression unreadable. What is it? She hesitated, wringing her hands. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I nodded slowly, letting her words hang in the air for a moment. I know, I said. She blinked, surprised. You do? Yes, I said. But that doesn't change anything. What's done is done, Danielle. We both have to live with that now. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. I hope one day you can forgive me, she whispered. I hope one day I can too, I said, my voice steady. For Adam's sake, I'll try. But don't mistake that for an invitation to rebuild what's gone. We're not going back. Not ever. She nodded, wiping at her eyes. Take care of yourself, Ethan. And, thank you. For everything you did for me. For us. I didn't respond. I turned and walked down the steps, leaving her standing there. As I drove home, I wasn't consumed by anger or sadness. I didn't replay the betrayal in my mind or wonder what I could have done differently. Instead, I thought about the future, not hers, not ours, but mine. The chapter was closed. What came next was entirely up to me. And for the first time in a long time, that thought didn't scare me. It felt like freedom.